From some of the encounters that I've had with people in Virginia Beach, I'm pretty certain to, a large degree, is that the right term? I'm pretty certain, however, that, so there have been a few shootings here. There was a place that I used to work that got shut down because somebody got shot and killed there. A bunch of young kids are going to Virginia Beach on the ocean front, and there's been some shootings out there. And, I've been threatened several times, at least 3 times, with being shot. One, the person actually showed the gun. Another one, anyway. So one of the reasons I feel like people are actually, one of the things that's actually happening here is because, first of all, a lot of young men who are the ones that are doing this, there is so much stress that they have never been guided on how to deal with it more effectively than just threatening to shoot people and or shooting people. And it's actually pretty much a very cowardice thing to do. A lot of it has to do with that these young men and boys don't know how to do anything. They don't know how to, first of all, they don't know how to defend themselves. They're weaklings. They're useless as far as any kind of hand-to-hand combat goes. They don't know really even how to fire weapons that well in the first place. And, if they were to come up against somebody who was trained in firearms and trained with situational awareness and gun safety and had gun training, firearms training and all that, they would definitely, it would be a different situation for these people. And so, and there's an interesting thing online, like a very weird phenomena, but it's also the same, insecure, weak, untrained, scared, really, is what a lot of it has to do with it. They're just scared. Because if you weren't scared, then you just, head up, fade, right? Just get fisticuffs, man. Put your dukes up and start fighting. Win, lose, or draw. But they're scared. These people aren't tested. They're not throwing blows anymore, and they're just resorting to going to get guns because they're scared. That's really what a lot of it has to do with. And they don't have any kind of father figures, no good uncles, no mentorship, no guidance of any kind, no training, which could be another type of, male figure to help them out. And I never really considered a lot of this stuff before for myself. It didn't really bother me. I kind of just somehow stayed on a track where I just decided that I was going to figure these things out myself. Not everyone, my circumstances are interesting. I seem to have had a lot of fortunate things that have landed in my path, but then again, I've always been a seeker, and I still have a lot of these types of, people, when people do certain things, I just want to kick the shit out of them. But the thing is that in many cases, most cases, because most people are untrained, I can't. And therein lies one of the reasons why I don't. Because before, when I was much less mature, and, especially in my days growing up in New York and in Queens and the South Bronx and in South Florida, I got into a lot of fights. And so I've been tested in the street in very dangerous situations where people actually have shot me, stabbed me, bitten me, hit me with cinder blocks, shopping carts, baseball bats, so I've been through that enough to the point even where, people are built differently because of the fact that I still am willing to step up to people, especially these days, if anything were to happen. Thankfully, I just don't get myself into those situations. But the point that I'm making about that is that a lot of the reasons why people are resorting to gun violence is because they're scared, but mixed with this frustration. It actually has a lot more to do with fear. And then they get angry because they're scared. but they're really more angry with themselves. It's anger turned inwards, because it's a form of being they feel ashamed of themselves, because they know that they're useless, they're weak, that they can't do anything. It really sucks for a person who not only is economically disadvantaged for whatever reasons, you can cite conspiracy theories or just the way that capitalism works and all of these various different things, but when you couple that with also not having any kind of self-confidence in your abilities as a male, because this is a huge thing in society, is with men, is just this kind of frustration. Like, if you feel useless in every way, so you can't fight, you can't get, you can't get the women, you don't know how, you don't have earning power, and you don't have any skills, any talent, you might even be uneducated. Like, all of these things together add up for young men and just men in general, because you got guys who are older cats out here who are acting the same way out in the streets, just acting stupid, and just because they're frustrated constantly, they're just constantly under stress. It's like a pressure cooker, or anything that's under pressure, too much pressure, and it explodes. And there's no release valve for that pressure. A lot of things that are under pressure, like even a pressure cooker has a release valve. Even like the kettle, when it starts to boil, it's not just capped off, it starts to whistle. The pressure, that's what makes the kettle whistle, is the pressure being released through a valve that's at a certain angle, so that it makes the whistling sound. But all of this is, just a statement about the necessity for healthy living and self-defense and being well-rounded. And this is part of something that I've just been working on for a very long time, and I've talked about it for years and years and years, and I'm really tightening it up and really delivering it more straight and clearly to people. I've been in private practice for so long, but people need to know, and I've also come to understand through things that I've developed, like what's called PACTs, for example, personally attuned conversational transformation sessions, which the P is also, it can stand for public as well, publicly, but because I do a lot of public speaking, it's just really a necessity I'm seeing for people to be trained. Because, for example, there have been occasions, and I'm not going to name where and when, but, for example, these same people who are talking about threatening about shooting, right? The reason why they did it is because I was very gracious to them a couple times. There was a guy who came up to me and started talking all kinds of stuff and got my space, so I kicked him in the leg a couple times. Not even hard. I could have knocked him to the ground and even broke his legs if I kicked him in the knee, or at least really done some bad damage to his connective tissue. But I just kicked him a couple times to just say, stay away from me. And eventually he was like, okay, I'm this and that, and started talking about the guns and shooting and all that other stuff like that. And that's happened several times when people out there acting like they're tough. Another time, it was so weird. I was going to a hotel, and I was getting on going to get on an elevator, but I didn't see where the elevator was at first, so I made a left in this certain area, and then I looked over and I saw where the elevator was, and so I turned to go towards an elevator, and there was a guy standing there. And when I walked up, he's like, he said something like, who you is, or some crazy shit, like just something really stupid, like, I'm like, or who do you think you are, or like something like that, like just addressed to me, like, what the fuck? Why are you even talking to me? This is an elevator. People get on it. Like, where are you coming from? And then just kept on talking. I'm like, what are you freaking out about? Like, why are you scared? That's all about fear. It's really about fear. Most people just move out of my way because they don't understand. Like I wear these heavy industrial chains, so I do understand that for some people it can be intimidating, and it's even been said so. Once I walked into this place where I work security, and people who weren't familiar with me saw me walk in, and then somebody mentioned, "Oh man, you scared everybody when you walked in," and then one of the bartenders, she said, "Oh yeah, they're sissies or whatever like that. She said, let them be scared. They need to be scared of our security," or something like that, But it's just, people are just in general. I've talked about this a lot lately too, because I've developed a lot of my research and study and given it a name given it a name, which is athanatophobology, which is based on athanatophobia, which is not being afraid of death, and athanatophobology is the study of not being afraid of death, because I've actually systematized not being afraid of death, and also ultimately just not being afraid of anything, because most fears are connected to the unknown. One of the biggest unknowns that most people have is the fear of death. So this is something that I know very intimately, very dearly, very closely, very well, because of the fact that people are just operating under a general cloud of fear. And so, lately I've been paying attention to a lot of, male studies, men studies, gender studies, sex studies, dating studies. I've been looking a lot of the stuff that I've been hearing, because it just kind of bubbles over to the surface. You almost can't escape it, how this stuff is pushed on you. And I'm just seeing how fragile so much of this is. It's 4:44. I'm going to have to look into that real quick while I'm sitting here. What is the good old 4:44? And now we're taking a metaphysical divination tool break. Protective magic, the number 4:44 at 4:44 in the early evening, or pre-evening, as Sheldon Cooper said. Your prayers are heard. This number assures you that you are being heard. Your angels are guiding you, surrounding you, and answering your prayers of protection. It may be a time of struggle, but you are being led into the light by your guardians. Take a moment to thank your angels for their protective presence in your life. End of 4:44, Protective Magic, quote from the Angel Numbers book by Mystic Mihaela. And now back to this talk about people's fear and the study of not being afraid, and male studies, and why a lot of young people, young men in particular, are going around shooting people. And the reason is because they're scared. And that you wouldn't be doing that kind of stuff if you weren't. Like, for example, I just ignore most of the things that people do or even say. People say weird things to me sometimes when they get scared, like that guy at the elevator that I was just talking about. And he just kept on talking and talking and talking, and we got to like another floor, like the second floor, and a woman got on, and it's so weird, like how crazy, how funny fear plays out, like how weak and scared this guy was, because this woman got on who didn't know either of us, and he's like, you know him, da 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 da, because I wasn't saying anything. I was completely silent the whole time. I didn't say it. I just ignored him, and he just kept on escalating and escalating and escalating. And then finally he got off the elevator. Like she said more to him than I did, because I said nothing, and he was talking to me. Because he said something, he asked her, he's like, you know him? She's like, and she just kind of shook her, like, I don't know. And he was just going on and on and on. He kept on talking until he got off the elevator. It's kind of actually funny to me. I don't know if I could be considered a bully in this way, but I'm actually just amused at how fearful some people act around me. And it's really, really funny. Oh, and the thing I was mentioning, too, about online, you can see how this fear and weakness plays out on the internet, too. Because, and the insecurity of so many people, for example. Because every time, pretty much almost every single time, besides the whole age-related weakness comments that people make on the internet, when you see somebody doing martial arts or mobility training or something like that, like a lot of the age things are like, you're in your 20s, that's easy for you to say, or wait till you get to your 40s and talk about that. And here I am still doing backflips and spins and 5 rounds of 5 minutes long each at 48 years old and super hyper athletic, right? But besides that kind of, weak talk that people do, one of the things that you inevitably, almost without fail, ever, on every single like demonstration of somebody doing some martial arts moves or some cool tricks that are like flashy kicks, almost inevitable, the people who are out there, part of the conversation in the comments is people saying that's not going to work in a real fight, right? Or that'll never work. You can't pull that off in a real fight. Or then it inevitably turns to, well, I'll just pull out my 45, or I'll just pull out my gat, or pew pew pew, or my 9mm will solve that. And these are just the weakest, stupidest, most uneducated, definitely untrained idiots that you can possibly find hiding behind their keyboards. I've really started to understand the idea of what the keyboard warrior means, because it's this absolute weakness And I feel pity for it, but I also feel in some way, I don't know, responsible to address this in this very coarse and harsh way that I'm doing so, in order to also get people's attention, to pass on the message that, you know, with a little bit of training and stability and regulating of your emotions, learning about death, learning that you don't have to be afraid to die, that you don't have to be afraid of anything, that you can really get this in check and live actually a more peaceful life. Again, one of the reasons why I don't even want to fight people is because I know that I'm not the baddest motherfucker on the planet. First of all, so this is one thing that you understand from sparring and training. And like, you know, when I was on the wrestling team, my coaches would very often get the best of me. Other people on the wrestling team, when you're training with, sometimes they would get the best of you. When you train boxing, I train with a professional boxer, and there's things that they do that just blow your mind. I trained with a black belt, David Gondres I didn't train, but I rolled with him once, and he was just showing me some things. Who's a black belt in the Machado Jiu-Jitsu, and just like the crazy stuff that they do. Or, you know, this guy Matt that I rolled with one time, like there's people who have skills, right? And you roll all the time, or you get in the ring and you're sparring, or the crazy amounts of street fights that I've had, you get to a point where you're just like, yeah, I could dominate and win a lot of fights, but in street fights, but the pain and the discomfort and it's unnecessary. Like if you sign up to go into a competition, that's fine. Like going sparring, doing smokers, right? Doing competitions, amateur, professional, you know, even those like street brawls that they have that are sanctioned, all that cool. You signed up for that. You're going to get hurt. But a lot of people, again, don't even do that. It's one of the reasons why a lot of young men, or men in general, don't ever sign up to train in martial arts or do anything like that, because they know they can't fight, and they can't fathom, and they won't be able to tolerate on a continual basis being bested by another man, just simply because that other man has more training than them. Even women. Some women can overcome a lot of men because of the training that they have. And a lot of men in general, they don't realize that their whole stupid ego and their fear behind it is what's actually holding them back. All you got to do is build up experience. We need to have a world full of warriors so that we can have a world full of peace. Because the more fights that I've been in, the more training that I do every day, the more weapons that I learn about, the more combat that I understand, the more rigorous trials that I undergo, the less that I want to fight. And it's not because I'm afraid, because the one thing I'm not afraid of pain. I'm not afraid of being tortured. I'm not afraid of being imprisoned, captured. I'm not afraid of having my skin peeled off my body, burned at the stake, having hot things shoved in holes in my eyes and my brain and my nose and my mouth and other parts of my body. I'm not afraid of burning in hell forevermore. I'm not afraid of God. I'm not afraid of anything or anyone. I've already determined that. That's part of my eighth antidote, is getting to the root cause of fear, including the fear of eternal punishment, which a lot of people have, and it's connected to their fear, which a lot of people do not realize, that not only do they have the fear of the unknown. The ultimate unknown is what happens after you die. But once you establish that you're not going to be afraid of anything that comes after you die, a lot of fear gets broken off. It loses all of its force and charge along the chain. Very interesting. That's a similar idea to some of the stuff that they teach in the Church of Scientology. I am not a Scientologist, but I have studied it very intensely, and there's something that they talk about, locks on the chain and charge and engrams and things like that, and it's very interesting. But it's something that I really do know, that once you get to the very root cause of all fear, which it's the fear of the unknown, and one of the biggest unknowns is death. And especially when they're spiritually minded, or other people who think about sky daddies and gods and things like that, what they're afraid of is what's going to happen to them after they die. Either they're going to be punished or go to paradise, but they don't know because they have questionable behaviors in life. But once you get to the root of that, once you do as I did, which you say, you know what? I've read about the major God of the primary religions in the Bible. I understand the character of it. I also know that the universe is eternal, and that the character of this being that maybe even created our universe with the Big Bang is not the end-all be-all, because you cannot possibly put limits on an eternal being. Meaning, once you put a limit on it and say it's a throne in the sky and has warriors and soldiers and can communicate, basically what you're doing is you're anthropomorphizing it, and or at least limiting it to time and space, and it can't walk away from gardens and not know about certain things are happening. This is not an eternal being. The very idea, very understanding, the very logic of eternity tells you that that being in the Bible is not an eternal being. So it is not the end-all, be-all of everything. And so the characteristics that you read about that kind of being in these books of faith, these religions and things like that, is not, regardless of how powerful it is, regardless if it did actually create the Big Bang and create this particular universe, it didn't create all of existence, it didn't create all of time, and you can't create time because time is only referential to the various different cycles that we see, and different things like the 9 million plus cycles per second, or that we call a second, in cesium atoms, in order to excite things in a certain state, in this electron in a certain ground state. But everything is referential time, and what we experience as time and what we understand of it. But there is no real time, because in eternal existence, time is simply, again, what we observe from our perspective. It's simply referential to various different cycles. And when you get to that understanding, you realize that this universe that we live in is just one special case, or maybe a case of many cases that happens, but it's just one particular universe, not the entire whole of existence. And therefore, even if there's a being that created this and is shockingly powerful to have done that with the technology and know-how to be able to do such a thing, the characteristics that are attributed to it in all of the books that you can find, I don't want to have anything to do with that. I have already claimed that I bow to nothing, I bow to no one, and I will never submit to you. I don't care what you do to me. I don't care if you make it feel like it's forevermore. You can't do it forevermore, because you are not forevermore. And so once you eliminate, once you establish your defiance, once you establish and declare your eternal sovereignty, and you break the chains of fear that throughout all of eternity, by making a simple decision to understand it logically, rationally, reasonably, and coherently, by knowing the true essence of existence, that the universe is in fact eternal, and that there are no God beings that are eternal that can have any kind of personification or limitation, or have that politically structured cosmic hierarchy. Once you get to the ultimate state of fear, then all of that vanishes, and it takes a little bit of practice. Now, I know I've gone really far off the deep end for a lot of people into metaphysics, but I am a metaphysical scientist. I'm a philosopher of metaphysics. I have a PhD from a mystery school, that you could call it a modern mystery school, that is outside of the mainstream schools. It's called the University of Metaphysical Sciences. And I also have a degree in clinical hypnosis from a school that is established with the United States Department of Education, called the Hypnosis Motivation Institute. So this information comes from not only my 4 decades of martial arts practice, but also my studies in clinical hypnosis and my studies in metaphysical sciences. And with that, I've been developing the Institute of Metaphysical Hypnosis, and thanatophobology is part of those studies, which is really the study of how and why you shouldn't fear anything at all. And it's a truth that you can establish. It's a truth that and an experience that you can come to. And I would recommend that everybody go towards finding that out, because in that way you cannot be controlled by anything or anyone. You can absolutely declare your eternal sovereignty. You can be free from fear. And in that way, you can even live as a person who is confident and free from conflict on the earth to the deepest degree that you can possibly find. I am Hakeem Ali-Bocas Alexander.